My name is Linda Strejewski. I have the honor of chairing the commission. Our main purpose tonight is to get input from you, our fellow residents, on the charter amendments that the commission plans to recommend to City Council. So that we can better understand input from you. We asked you to indicate on the sign-in sheets the topics that interest you. If you skip doing that, it would be helpful if you would walk back to the table and do that, just so we can facilitate hitting topics that we know you care about. And there also are comment cards if you want to leave us a note instead of speaking yourself tonight. Because this constitutes an official meeting of the commission, we have a formality or two to get out of the way. First, to the roll call, which I also will use to recognize the other members of the commission and ask them to stand or wave so you can all, you can see them all. The other commission members are Roland Aglin, Harriet Applegate, Graham Ball, Jonathan Ciesla, Drew Herzig, Craig Kluge, Stephanie Morris, and Guy Thillian. This has been a really hard-working commission, and I thank my fellow commissioners for all their diligence. I also want to thank council and the mayor for their support, and Lee Crumrine, the Cleveland Heights Assistant Law Director, who's also here tonight, who's been very helpful to the commission. And thanks to Steve Barker, who has set up our sound and recording arrangements for us. And thank you all for coming tonight. We very much appreciate you taking time on this lovely day to be with us. I know some of you were at our meeting in February, where we discussed a few potential changes to the charter. Would you raise your hand if you were at the February meeting? Okay, terrific. Well, thank you all for coming again. I guess we didn't scare you off. Here's our agenda. Most of our time tonight is going to be allocated to your comments. For those who were not at the February meeting, this slide describes the purpose of a charter. Our facilitator, Kevin Butler, who also was a big help to us, did a presentation on this at the February meeting. The important point is that a charter for a home rule city like Cleveland Heights is like a constitution for the United States. So it's very high level, and changes to the charter require city council approval and voter approval. So it's a multi-step process which ends up with something on your ballot. This slide summarizes the history of the Cleveland Heights Charter. Bottom line, our 1921 charter has been amended from time to time, but in a piecemeal way. Even the amendments to implement the elected mayor were done piecemeal, and I'll cover in a minute why that happened. Council asked this commission to recommend changes to the charter in the best interest of the city. So not for one branch or another, but in the best interest of the city. And council directed us to consider changes needed due to the change in the form of government, switching to an elected mayor, and also to consider the recommendations of the 2019 Charter Review Commission. We've done both of those things, and we also reviewed the entire charter. And by the way, I do want to give a shout out to the 2019 Commission, which spent a lot of time and talent in a very thorough review of the charter. Is there anyone here who served on that commission? Oh, terrific. Glad you're here. We appreciate your help, and we really, really took benefit of your work. It saved us a ton of time, so we really appreciate it. We agreed with many of the recommendations in your report, and we incorporated them into our changes, so thank you very much. This slide and the following one summarizes how our commission worked. We had a lot of discussion and debate. It was very collegial and productive over many, many meetings. We had over 35 meetings since July, and that included several Saturday meetings that were 5 hours long. So we got to know each other pretty well. You have a very dedicated commission. Our meetings, of course, were open to the public, although we didn't have very many visitors. But we did share lots of information with the public as our work proceeded, as summarized on this slide. We know that some people watched our recordings, but I can't say we were breaking any YouTube records, but some people did watch. In terms of our proposals, as you know, if you looked at our webpage, we provided our proposed amendments in two ways. We gave you one amended charter, and we have a copy of that here for you tonight that is marked to show the changes. And then we also broke it down into 5 different amendments so that it would be easier for you and for council to understand how the changes interrelate. So for instance, one amendment has all of the changes that relate to the form of government, and another one has all the changes relating to ethics and training. And we also provided you a report which discusses our decisions. The report includes a section-by-section summary of the changes. So the report's what's being collated here and passed out to you. Now, it's possible that council may accept some of our amendments, but not all of them. They could take some changes within a particular amendment, but not all of them. And once council makes its decision, then the commission is standing willing to help council to formulate those changes into one or more amendments for the ballot. And if council decides to present the changes on the ballot as a series of amendments, it's possible, of course, that you, the voters, will only accept parts of them, some amendments, but not others. And obviously, we hope that council and all of you love all of our recommendations, but it's up to council to decide how and when any changes would go on the ballot, and then it's up to you, the voters, to decide whether you like them. So I'm going to start now with an overview of the charter. Because we wanted to reserve as much time as possible for your input, I'm going to highlight some of the more significant changes. So hopefully you had a chance to review the materials we posted, including the amendments and the draft report. But you could always go back and do that later, and you'll have more opportunities to give us comments. So starting from the beginning of the charter, we made some changes to the preamble. So we viewed the preamble as expressing the spirit of Cleveland Heights, sort of sets the tone and expresses our values. As I said, council had directed us to focus on any additional changes needed to implement fully the elected mayor form of government. So we spent a lot of time on that. We had input from our elected officials and from some other mayors, all very helpful. Our goal was to reflect an appropriate balance of powers between the executive and legislative branches. And regarding the balance of powers, it's important to note that a citizen ballot issue, like the one that was passed to implement an elected mayor, it's only allowed to cover one issue. So the committee that put forth that amendment had to limit their language to only provisions that focused strictly on the mayor. So in practical terms, this meant that many changes were simply to take out the word city manager and put in the word mayor. They weren't able to also cover changes relating to council. So they didn't propose adding to the charter other features that you usually find in a mayor-council charter. This was confirmed by our interview with members of the committee for an elected mayor. We tried to fill in that gap. And our approach to the balance of powers was also informed by interviews with Mayor Wheelo of South Euclid and Mayor Weiss of Shaker Heights. And we also reviewed charters from those cities and from some other cities that have an elected mayor. But bottom line, our goal was to enable both branches to do their jobs. So the following slides highlight some of the changes we recommend regarding the form of government. We added a new section on interaction between the mayor and council. And this section expresses an expectation of cooperation and collaboration between the legislative and executive branches. Recognize they're separate, they have different jobs to do, but we'd like them to collaborate. And we assume everybody will act in good faith in the best interest of the city. This provision also requires that administrative officials respond to council inquiries in a timely manner and attend council meetings when requested. We also removed the charter provision that refers to so-called inquiry options for council. That provision is a feature of a city manager form of government. We didn't find that in any of the elected mayor charters that we looked at, and it seems to have caused confusion about lines of communication, so we deleted it. We made some changes regarding appointments of directors to make clear that in every case, the mayor appoints, subject to council approval. The mayor continues to have the authority to supervise departments, but council determines the duties of departments and directors. And again, this is consistent with elected mayor charters. And finally, we added a statement regarding the commonly understood function of council to advocate in appropriate cases on behalf of all residents. Regarding council meetings, the mayor has, and the mayor will continue to have, the right to attend council meetings. We did add a provision allowing council to decide on a case-by-case basis whether the mayor should attend executive sessions. Now, of course, in many cases, the mayor should be at an executive session. But there are some cases, such as when council is discussing an appointment which council alone makes, when council may prefer that the mayor not attend. So we gave them that flexibility. We also added a provision permitting council to authorize virtual meetings by ordinance or resolution. We recognize that virtual meetings have some shortcomings as they've been used in the past, which was basically during COVID. Resident comments were restricted. But council can address that in creative ways, and we recognize that there are some instances when virtual meetings are helpful and needed. Filling vacancies. Do we have any fans here of filling council vacancies? We've had a lot of experience filling vacancies on council, and you may recall that voters approved a change to the charter a few years ago to add a deadline for council appointments, which was a good change. But experience has shown that the vetting process for applicants could use a little more time. Elected officials suggested, and we agreed on an extension of the deadline so the council would have 60 days instead of 45. Elected officials also told us that the timeline for an election following an appointment was too tight. And we have seen 2 times in recent years when an appointment was made and an election occurred in the same calendar year. So that's happening this year, in fact. So there are balancing considerations at play here. You know, on the one hand, you could say, well, you should get the seat on the ballot in front of the voters as soon as possible. On the other hand, it may make sense to have a little bit more time before an election. So we did provide for some more time to lapse before the council seat would go on the ballot for the unexpired term. And as to mayoral vacancies, the provision now in the charter has a lot of steps. It sort of has a line of succession, similar to what we have for president. It goes through a whole series of steps with no deadlines. We know that we in Cleveland Heights, we need deadlines. So we modified it to cut out some of the steps and to add deadlines. We also considered lengthening the time between an appointment and an election, similar to the changes for council. But we decided it was more important for voters to weigh in sooner after a mayoral vacancy had been filled. We only have one mayor, so we thought it was more important to get that in front of the voters sooner. Salaries. So salaries for our city council have not been adjusted often in Cleveland Heights. And in fact, they haven't been adjusted since 2004. Now, I want to emphasize that nobody on council raised this issue. The mayor didn't raise this issue. But we thought, well, that seems like a long time. And the charter provision on the mayor, unfortunately, doesn't really have any periodic provision for adjustments, which was an oversight. So we need to fix that. Everybody needs a salary adjustment once in a while. So for salary adjustments for the council and the mayor, we started with a provision in the Lakewood Charter, but we didn't follow all of that, the features of that one. We did add a new step that the Civil Service Commission would make a recommendation on salaries, so you get some research in the mix. But ultimately, council decides whether to recommend a salary increase. So they have to take the political heat for their decision. I don't think there's any chance they're going to be frivolous about this, but they do deserve a raise from time to time. So this slide also refers to removal of elected officials. The charter provides right now that a council member or the mayor can be removed for doing bad things. You know, these are things like malfeasance or a felony. But the rules and the triggers for a removal are different for council and the mayor right now. We made some changes to make the triggers consistent and make them relevant to public service. And then we put those triggers in a provision in the new ethics section. The charter today also permits removal of a council member for violating the charter or for violating council rules. So we considered whether violating the charter should be a trigger for removal of the mayor. But ultimately, we decided that this trigger was a bad idea for everybody. Not a good idea for council, not a good idea for the mayor, because it seems very subjective and possibly subject to abuse. I mean, if people aren't following the charter, we have a chance to decide about that when we go to the polls to elect the folks. changes relating to elections. The commission voted to recommend that the city adopt ranked choice voting. How many of you are familiar with ranked choice voting? Oh, good. We have information in our report and on our webpage about ranked choice voting, but basically it involves the voter ranking the candidates for seat on the ballot. And we recommended two different kinds of ranked choice voting. Both of them involve counting in rounds. For the mayor and our judge, we would use instant runoff. This eliminates the need for a mayoral primary. So if no candidate wins initially, the lowest vote getter is eliminated, and a ballot that includes a vote for the eliminated candidate is recounted to shift those to the highest remaining candidate that was on that voter's ballot. So if a voter ranked candidates A, B, and C in that order, and A finished last, and nobody got a majority, then any ballot that picked A would get their vote reallocated to whoever that ballot picked second. And for council, we recommended a different kind of ranked choice voting called single transferable voting. So any candidate with enough votes to hit or exceed a threshold wins. For example, if you have 3 seats on the ballot, the threshold is 26%. And then votes for winning candidates that exceed the threshold are reallocated to each ballot's next highest ranking remaining candidate. So this means in single transferable vote terminology that the votes aren't wasted. And again, losing candidates' votes get reallocated. This slide lists reasons to use ranked choice voting. Advocates say that it's fairer, that it avoids the lesser of two evils choices, and it promotes cooperation. Voters in a multi-candidate race may not see their top choice elected, but they're likely to see some of their choices win, so voters may be more satisfied. On the subject of how we elect council, we also discussed a change to using a hybrid method of electing council. So right now we elect every council member at large. A hybrid method would use a ward system to elect some council members and then at large for some. We didn't vote on this in the end because there was a vote taken that came out in favor of ranked choice voting, and the folks who were in favor of ranked choice voting, who also happen to be generally the people who were interested in considering the hybrid method, they felt that ranked choice voting was a better improvement to implement, so we dropped any further discussion of a hybrid system. We also felt that the mayor and council could address in some other ways concerns used to support an argument for hybrid elections. So one argument is that if you use wards, it would be clearer to residents who they should call with issues or complaints. But there are ways to address this now. You know, for instance, the mayor is implementing the Mayor's Action Center, but until that's fully operational, other methods could be used so that residents know who to call and so that residents get a response in a timely manner. And then secondly, the second bullet here refers to how many signatures are needed to run for mayor or council. The elected officials suggested that we should lower the number of signatures, so we did reduce those to 100 for mayor and 50 for council candidates. We recommended a number of changes to the provisions in the charter dealing with finances and the budget. These sections were updated to reflect the very successful process that was used last year. Both the administration and the council were very happy with that procedure. Our charter provides for the right of voters to petition for an initiative, referendum, and recall. These are very important rights. The elected mayor change was adopted using an initiative process, so you may have some familiarity with that. We revised the provisions to reduce the signature requirements for petitions somewhat. We felt it was more democratic to have lower requirements, and the report has details about the effect of those changes. Ethics and training. We added a new article to the charter to cover ethics and training. Our charter is 100 years old, and in the century since it was written, there's more attention paid to rules around ethics in government. We agree with the 2019 Commission that the charter should reflect modern concerns about ethics, For instance, we broadened the applicability of conflict of interest rules to cover not only the mayor and council, but also employees. And on training, we understand that the city has from time to time provided some orientation for elected officials, and the city also pays for certain training, but there isn't a consistent program. The surveys and the comments from elected officials led us to consider the benefits of some training. The commission found that the Lakewood Charter seemed to be a good model to start with. Our provision requires that newly elected council members and mayors would have some training, all to be completed within 90 days of taking office. Our provision suggests possible training topics, such as budget and finance, legislative procedure, and drafting legislation, but the details are left to council. And any existing elected official has the option to take advantage of that training as well. Non-discrimination. So Cleveland Heights has ordinances now regarding non-discrimination and equal opportunity. The commission discussed whether this kind of non-discrimination provision should be in the charter or in ordinances. Because of the high priority the Cleveland Heights residents place on fair and equitable treatment for all, the commission recommends a non-discrimination provision for the charter. It does cover protected classes in addition to those now covered in city ordinances. On charter review, currently the charter provides that council should consider a charter review commission every 10 years. We're recommending that council must appoint a commission every 10 years and must consider one every 5 years. We thought waiting 10 years or more to do a review could leave us with a charter that is woefully out of date. And finally, we recommended many changes in language, many changes in language throughout the document that were basically to update wording and make the provisions easier to understand. For instance, the initiative referendum and recall provisions, although they're kind of basically covering the same process, they were written differently in slight ways that made it very hard to work your way through them. So we tried to clean up that kind of stuff. We changed the numbering format to a more modern approach, and then we made a few changes to incorporate gender-neutral language. The work of the 2019 commission was very helpful on all of these changes. So as I mentioned earlier, we considered but didn't propose the hybrid election of council. The commission also discussed but decided not to include in the charter a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement relates to injustices against indigenous people who were living in Northern Ohio, but who were displaced, often violently, by settlers and the government at that time, and it also recognizes continuing injustices. Instead of a charter provision, the commission recommends that council consider other ways to recognize in a meaningful way these injustices, as well as contributions of indigenous people to our country. This could be an annual resolution with activities commemorating indigenous people, but the first step would be conversation among indigenous people, our other residents, and the city about future actions. So now we're going to move to public comment. We want to hear from our residents from Cleveland Heights. And I want to also remind you that in addition to making a comment tonight, you can leave us a card with comments. You can email the commission at crc@clevelandheights.gov. We have a meeting next Tuesday. You're welcome to come to the meeting. But now we'll start with comments. So here's our procedure. You can step up to the microphone if you'd like to make a comment. We ask that you please limit your comments to 2 minutes because we'd like to allow for comments from as many people as possible. It's possible a member of the commission may ask you a question, and if that happens, you could have a minute to respond. If a topic seems popular, we may ask for a show of hands as to how many people agree with it so that we can hear from as many of you as possible. We ask that you please now come up to the microphone to repeat a comment that was already made. And then once you ask a question, please let other people have a turn. And if there's enough time after everybody gets a chance to talk, you can have a second round to come up to the microphone. Any questions about the procedure? Okay, Rachel is going to hold up signs when you're down to 30 seconds or when you've run out of time.
And set my alarms.
Okay. So again, thank you all for coming. We look forward to your comments. So who'd like to go first? Don't be shy. Barbara, you want to come up to the microphone?
First, I wanted to thank the commission because I did read the document before I came, and I think it's extremely impressive and obviously reflects a lot of thought and careful consideration. I have more of a question than a comment, and that is that I did take note of the changes in the number of signatures required to initiate an ordinance, to call for a referendum, to call for removal of an officer, and I guess also just to get on the ballot. And I wondered if the commission has the numbers to show us as to what are the current number of signatures based on what the existing charter requires.
Yeah, I think it's in the report.
I didn't see that. Wasn't there commentary about the difference between the base against which the percentage is calculated? And I totally agree that calculating
Yeah.
this against
Well, I think, if
the
I'm
voters-
remembering correctly, I think for the last council election, they needed something in the range of 300 signatures
to get on the ballot.
to get on the ballot for
Uh-huh.
council. And
I'm sort of less focused on that actually than I am the initiated ordinance. I mean, I recall.
Oh, for
I think-
initiative
I think we
petition?
all
That's in the
painfully
report.
recall the Cedar Lee Park issue.
Yeah.
And if it becomes very easy to get that
Yeah.
on the ballot, I think that's problematical.
so under the, it is discussed in the report, and under the current requirement, based upon the November 2023 election, 3,400 signatures roughly would be required. And under
But can
the
I ask you a
new,
question, though? It doesn't the existing charter calculate this off of the number of registered voters, not against the number of people who voted in the last election? And I totally support the idea of calculating it in relation to who voted, but I think it totally skewers the number.
so if you use the current rule and a 10% percentage, and you apply it against people who voted as opposed to registered voters.
But
you would
that
need-
isn't the current charter, is what I'm saying.
I know, but it isn't the current charter, but actually when the elected mayor initiative was used, the city decided to use that rule anyway.
Okay.
But, so the rule currently would require, if you used all registered voters, which is a bad method, but if you used
No,
all
I
registered
agree
voters,
that, yeah.
and you use 10%, which is the percentage in the current charter, it would be 3,400 signatures.
Mm-hmm.
With our change, 5% against people who voted, it's 855.
Yeah, so it's a pretty dramatic.
It's a change. It's
Yeah,
a change. And,
yeah.
you could argue whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. The only other comment I had was that I also appreciated that you rid the charter of provisions that are already covered in Ohio law so that you don't have the conflicting provisions. But the one area where you didn't seem to do that was in the ethics area. And, I know from my past life as a lawyer that there are very extensive and rigorous ethics provisions in the general laws of Ohio, and there's a whole body of ethics commission opinions interpreting them, which are
Okay.
very helpful. And if our charter has its own separate provisions, I think it creates a lot of confusion. So
okay.
that would be my other comment. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Who would like to talk now? Oh, for the people on the commission, if you'd like to come up to the front of the room so you can see the people making comments, you're more than welcome to do that. We have some chairs up here for that purpose. Thank you. Go ahead.
So, hi, I'm Guy. I was primarily responsible for that area about number of signatures required for initiatives and recall and all the rest of it. And I just want to also offer, thank you, Linda, for all you said. But when we look at other cities in the area, like Lakewood and other cities that we were using as references, because they seem to have a very good experience, what we chose was in line with what they have chosen as well. It did represent a dramatic decline, as you see, but it is consistent with what the other cities have been asking for. And the other cities have not had a serious problem with too many people coming up with, spurious questions and things like that. Get back on that.
Thank you, Guy. Who would like to go next? Marty, go ahead.
Thanks. This is Marty Gelfand, 3049 Meadowbrook. This is a very impressive document, and I know you all put a lot of hard work into this. So, and that was a really excellent summary. Although it went so fast that I didn't.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
No, it was great, but that gives us a chance to, well, wait a minute, why did she say that? So there were two things that I wanted to comment on. One is I'm not sure why you would want to lower the number of signatures that potential elected officials and current elected officials seeking reelection would have to get on their petitions. I mean, I would think raising it would probably be a better idea because it would show the seriousness of the petitioner or candidate, and that they're willing to go out and reach out to the public in a serious way. And the second question, I think 3.12 is really good. I think it clarifies some things, but it also maybe doesn't clarify things enough. As far as, members of council should definitely have an open door to department heads because they're the ones that run their department. I think free speech would prohibit you from saying you can't talk to employees, but I think talking with administrative officers, employees who aren't necessarily department heads could confuse the issue in some ways. I think officially trying to represent a constituent with a question and a call for help, it would make more sense, I think, to formally have direct interaction with the department heads, not necessarily the other administrative and employee.
So you're talking about interaction, not in a meeting, but outside of a meeting?
I'm talking about, as a council person, you have a specific constituent inquiry or a personal inquiry that you want to know more about a certain thing. It would make more sense to formally recognize the relationship between members of council and the department heads and put less emphasis, although again, free speech would require that they be able to speak with, whoever they want, but not necessarily on an official basis.
Well, we talked about that a lot, and I think it's fair to say that we considered ways that we could address it in the charter in ways that could be helpful. And we thought that if we provided that council could invite the members of the administration to meetings, and they could talk to them in meetings, that if all else failed, that would be a way to have some questions asked and to get some answers. Now, we also hope that perhaps instead of inviting people to meetings, there could be more informal conversation, but it's a little bit harder to write that into the charter. So we were trying to use the structure of the charter in a way that respected kind of the high-level document that the charter is without getting into micromanaging one-on-one interactions between council and administrative staff. So that was our thinking.
Oh, and then the first question was the number of signatures.
So we had several elected officials commented that they felt that some other jurisdictions had lower requirements for signatures, and they suggested that we consider lowering the ones for Cleveland Heights. So I know we heard from at least one elected official who said, well, I think 150 is too low. Maybe whatever is the case now is too high, but that one may be too low for one of the reasons that you cited, namely that if you are a candidate and you have to go out and get a couple hundred signatures, for one thing, it mandates you to go out and talk to voters, and that may be a good thing because it may help you to understand whether you like talking to voters and how much of that you can stand. And you may decide, I'm just not getting enough traction here. Maybe I should forget about this and support somebody else. So there could be arguments made either way. So I appreciate your comments. Guy?
If I could just offer that we, not that it's a guide for everything we did, but we just went down to this Ohio Revised Code, what's in the code. Those are the quantities of signatures that are required from there for council according to the code. We found that in other communities as well. Adopted that.
We also were thinking with signatures that we wanted to decrease the barrier to entry to engagement with Cleveland Heights politics rather than increase the barrier. And one of the elected officials who came and spoke with us, rather Councilman Jim Posh, who's collecting signatures right now, so that when he went to the Board of Elections, they were shocked at the number of signatures that he had to collect, and said that that can't be right because he has to collect something like 350, and that just seems out of proportion.
Drew?
One of the guiding principles in reviewing the charter was how could we make Cleveland Heights more democratic? How could we make government more open and accessible so that people can be active participants in government? So a lot of the decisions we made were based on saying, does this keep people out of government or does this include people in government? And so one of the ways was lowering that kind of, you still have to get elected, so you still have to get a certain number of votes, but we figured this will make it easier for people to get engaged with the council.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? This is a remarkably shy audience for Cleveland Heights. Go ahead.
Actually, I've got a question. My
Okay.
name's Lou. I'm at 1808 Middlehurst. I think it was on slide 1, and maybe I misread it, but there was something about, in terms of council describing the job descriptions for the directors. Is that what I saw? If you can clarify.
One of the changes we made concerning the balance between the legislative and executive branches was to provide that the mayor continues to have the authority to supervise the departments, but council defines the departments and the duties of directors. And that also relates to this idea of having communication between council and directors.
What is the logic behind that? I mean, and don't you feel at a certain point that council might be almost stepping out of bounds to the person that should be handling the day-to-day? I guess that's, I
Well-
just feel like it could create tension unnecessarily. And so I just want to be mindful and just ask, if you're creating that environment, does it already immediately create some tension that doesn't need to be there?
So I think the theory was, following patterns in other charters with elected mayors, that you provide for council to exercise some policy guidelines by defining the departments and the duties of directors. So for instance, the duties of directors could include you attend meetings when you're invited. So there's other ways you could handle that. But again, we were trying to figure out how in the charter we could try to address some of these communication issues, which many people were commenting upon when they came to see
And I
us.
understand the communications part. I mean, I'm empathetic towards that. I do feel like you need to have a direct contact. I'm just a little concerned when I just saw that brief PowerPoint slide, and I thought, boy, that's my choice, I guess, when I choose a mayor. The mayor creates his or her team, and they have 4 years to do well with his or her team. And then at that point, I choose whether they did a good job or not. And I just feel like that might have been one of those types of verbiage, that might create something that doesn't need to be created. I don't know, just throwing it out there, it's just something caught my attention, so I
Yeah.
just want you to be observant of it.
Yeah, and I think also I want to emphasize that the mayor does have the authority to appoint directors, and council approves those appointments, but the mayor does have the authority to pick his people.
But on what the job responsibilities are is what I'm.
I would like to think that there would be a lot of collaboration around that, and that there would be discussion before job descriptions were adjusted or suggested, or department changes were suggested. And it's not going to be a decision that's made in a vacuum. We made decisions on the charter with the assumption that everybody's going to act in good faith and is going to try to collaborate and cooperate. That was our hope. Now, maybe we're too optimistic, but that's what we hope will happen.
If I could just respond. There were several members of the commission who were inclined, as you are suggesting, well, why is council defining the organization of the executive department? But investigating every other city we looked at, that was the case. There was no city we looked at where it was not done, where council did not organize the executive departments. So with that kind of, for me, I know for me personally, is one of those things. I feel the wisdom of the community, Cleveland Heights, but also all the communities we looked at indicated that was a good choice. And so that's the direction we went. That's what we're in.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Len Friedson. I live at 3065 Berkshire Road. I want to follow up on this discussion that was about the authority of the council versus the authority of the mayor. This was a big component of what took place in 2019 about having an elected mayor at all and what should be the authority levels. Now, to the comment about we checked with other 50-odd communities in Cuyahoga County, that's good, but in 2024, I think it's fair to say that that's not good enough. I think what we have to have is a body that allows the mayor to have certainly authority to do things, but we have to prevent a rogue situation. And to your comment about assuming benevolence and goodwill, I don't think the charter should do that. I think the charter should have should outline extremes without getting into the details of individuals. Just saying that I understand the challenge of the mayor's authority versus the council's authority, and the attempt to have guidelines or rails, if you will. It's hard. It's very hard. But I'm not sure that assuming goodwill is a good place to go.
Who else would like to make a comment?
Every time someone talks, the fly goes to that.
I'm going to go a second round if nobody wants to take it.
There's somebody coming up.
Hi. Well, in a vacuum, somebody has to get up. I'm Howard Mayer, 1397 Blackmore Road. I was actually on the previous charter commission, so my compliments to the current commission for undertaking this very challenging task. Couple of things. One is the ranked choice voting, which is an interesting concept. You zipped through it pretty quickly when you were explaining it, and I went and read this, and I'm thinking this is pretty complicated stuff. Now, voters in Cleveland Heights are certainly intelligent,
Right.
but this is going to require an unusual amount of education, I think. How do you propose that this is going to actually take place?
Well, we realize that there's an education component to it and that voters need to become more familiar with it. And that if council decides they want to advance that to the ballot, there would be opportunities for the city to provide that kind of education so that voters get a better handle on it. And I think if people had a little practice at it, they wouldn't find it so scary. I've been to an event where you practice ranked choice voting by ranking beer. It was kind of fun, and it gives you a feel for how it works. So I think it certainly is something that we can address. But again, if the city decides they want to advance charter measures to the ballot, there's probably going to need to be some voter education on more than just that. But certainly on ranked choice voting, we recognize that.
Well, I think the other items are, I say easily explained, but we can get through them pretty quickly. This ranked choice voting is an unusual, well, for a lot of voters, it's a stretch. That's all. It's going to take.
It's an education opportunity.
What's that?
An education opportunity.
Okay, sure. So,
Just a quick response. We found in studies with places that have implemented ranked choice voting that after the first election, you saw approval percentages of the format to like 75, 80%, with up to 90% of voters saying they found the process easy to understand when they were actually doing it. I feel like when you're trying to explain it with slides and with just words, it's kind of difficult. But when you actually are just looking at the ballot, it makes intuitive sense.
okay,
Yeah.
well, it's pretty complicated.
Well, and Howard, I acknowledge that, we didn't spend a lot of time on it tonight, but that was because we didn't want to spend a lot of time on reviewing the changes because we wanted to allow more time to hear from the residents. So
Okay.
it was a trade-off.
So you heard.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next?
I'll take a second round. Just on the issue of, and this is Marty Gelfand for the record, on the issue of who defines the departments and the jobs of the departments and what they do. I mean that seems to me more of a legislative task. And I'm not sure what all the 50 different cities might have said, and that's all well and good. But I mean, if we look at the federal model, Congress creates the departments. The president chooses who he or she would want to head those departments, and with Senate confirming the choices. And so, but the president just doesn't sit in an Oval Office and say, well, I want this department to do this and I want that department to do that. It's really the Congress that creates those departments and defines how their sort of the governance structure, where the president then comes in and executes using the political infrastructure or the governmental infrastructure that's created by the legislative branch. So I think this commission's efforts at better defining those functions, I think, are well taken by me anyway, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Would like to go next?
Can you please clarify your thinking around the hybrid system of electing counselors? I didn't quite follow your argument.
As to how it works, or
why you decided against it.
well, we decided not to vote on it. We had talked about it preliminarily, and we then went back and had a second meeting where we actually were taking votes on what we were going to recommend. And it just happened that we voted on ranked choice voting before we got to hybrid, and ranked choice voting got enough votes to be proposed as part of our amendments. And at that point, the folks who were in favor of the hybrid method of electing council said, well, if we're going to do ranked choice voting, that's probably enough change to try to propose at this time. So we're not going to also consider proposing a hybrid method of electing council.
Well, it sounds
We did
like
talk
you're
about
making
it.
an either-or choice when it can be both.
Well, you could do both, but I think that people felt that ranked choice voting perhaps accomplished some of the same goals as hybrid. Drew?
Actually, we did vote on it, and the majority of the commission voted not to suggest a hybrid amendment kind of thing to move forward. We did take a vote on it. And the reasoning for all of this is, all of these proposals have to go to the council. The council will pick and choose which ones they decide to put on a ballot, and that ballot can be November, it can be farther in the future kind of thing. And then the voters have to decide which of those things that got on the ballot they want to put into place kind of thing. So it's 3 stages. It's our recommendations, council decides what goes on the ballot, the voters decide what goes from the ballot into the charter. In these discussions, we said, if we overload the ballot, people might get, I don't understand this, I'm going to vote no on everything. So it was partly strategic. It was partly also, for the city administration, a couple heavy lifts. There will be a heavy lift basically on the County Board of Elections to implement ranked choice voting. It will be a heavy lift on the city itself to draw wards and boundaries and create equal boundaries kind of thing. Some of us were very much in favor of that, but ultimately in the discussion we decided between the heavy lifting involved in implementing some of these changes and putting too much on the ballot and frightening people away from making changes, the majority of the council decided, and we did have the vote, decided ranked choice voting, yes, hybrid ward, not this time around.
Thank you all for your hard work. Joyce Roper, 2836 Scarborough. Just want to make a public comment that I was shocked that the land acknowledgement was not accepted. I think of Cleveland Heights as a very progressive city. One of the excuses was that there wasn't precedent in other municipalities, but then at the end it says there's been no legal challenges that have emerged in other cities who have passed similar measures. So apparently other cities have. So just want to state that I think we can do better. Thank you.
Well, go ahead.
I just want to clarify. So land acknowledgement is at the level of the charter is where we did not find any instances other than, did you find Portland, Oregon? So Portland, Oregon is one instance.
Portland, Maine.
Portland, Maine? Or
Portland, Maine. Portland, Oregon is considered one.
Okay, so Portland, Maine. But when the reference to, in the report, the reference to other municipalities refers to ordinances as well as other resolutions, ordinances, and the rest. So there isn't an inconsistency between that comment and when we say that cities other than Portland have not had a land acknowledgement in their charter.
And we did recommend that council should consider other methods of recognizing those injustices and, perhaps do an annual resolution with some ceremonial acknowledgement and other activities that would celebrate the contributions that Indigenous peoples have made to our culture and our country.
I have to say, there was quite a tug of war because some of us felt, why shouldn't Cleveland Heights be one of the first to do this? Why wait for such and something? But again, it's this whole package having to go to council. Council has to sift through this, and they're about to go on a month's vacation kind of thing, figure out what goes on the ballot and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of moving parts here. So we didn't accomplish all that we wanted to, but when we look back on what we did accomplish, it's not negligible for sure. And it's still open. I mean, a citizen's initiative to get a land acknowledgement in the charter is another possibility as well.
What the council is doing. Yes.
Who wants to go next? Yes.
It's Vince Reddy, 908 Vineshire Road. I was a member of the 2017 commission, and I appreciate the acknowledgement of the work that was done by that commission. I was really an opponent to our change in form of government, and I'm not like holding on to it for the rest of my life. I've come to accept the change, and I'm a fan of our current mayor and everything, but I do have a question about. I appreciate that you talk to other cities, for input, like South Euclid and Shaker you mentioned, but I also wonder about East Cleveland in terms of, that was the one city that had made a similar change to us, changing from a commission city manager form of government to a mayor council form of government in the mid 1980s. And it seems if anybody can alert us to pitfalls or things that we should be consider in our current situation, it would be East Cleveland, our immediate neighbor. And I wonder if there was any conversation with anyone in East Cleveland about it.
No. We spoke to Mayor Wheelo and Mayor Weiss. We extended an invitation to the mayor of Lakewood, but we couldn't make the scheduling work. So we didn't cast a larger net than that to speak to mayors from other cities.
Well, thanks, and I really appreciate the thoroughness of the work you did.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? Yeah.
And just to tie into that, we also made the assumption that this is now the form of government, so how do we clean up the charter? So it was a lot about the consistencies and the different pieces, so it was more of a given than going down that road in any capacity.
Who else would like to go? No other comments? Yes.
Again, Barbara Hawley. I just have a question. Has the commission given thought to how this will be presented to the voters? In other words, one choice is the complete document with everything. Another choice, I assume, is in pieces, parts, because you have 5 discrete sections. And I'm wondering if you've discussed this and have a recommendation.
It came up a couple times. We did talk about it. And in fact, we talked about it in terms of buckets. And at one point, we had 7 or 8 potential buckets. But when it came time to actually draft the language and put the language into buckets, we decided that it was really quite challenging to determine how to effectively do that before we had input from council as to what parts they wanted to move forward. So once we have some input from council, as I said in my comments, we would be happy to help council get through that stage of figuring out if you want this set of changes from our first amendment, you want to take some out, leave some in. All right, does that constitute one amendment that you want to put on the ballot? And do you want to put something else into another bucket? You know, when University Heights presented their recent charter amendments as a series of buckets, their council asked them to present in that fashion. And theirs was a much more limited kind of concept. And part of our challenge was because we were updating so much language, because our charter hadn't really been thoroughly changed in so long, there were a lot of cleanup changes. And yeah, you could say, well, we lived long enough with that. Why do we even have to change it? So, you could drop some of those things. But we felt like we were banging our heads against a wall unnecessarily, because until council gave us some feedback, it didn't really make sense to spend more time trying to dissect. But we talked about it, and we talked about that, council may decide that they want to propose parts of it and not others. Council may decide that they want to present parts of it sooner and other parts later. They may decide they want to put the whole thing on the ballot. There are pros and cons. They may decide they want to do something this year. They may decide they don't want to do it till next year. There's lots of possibilities. So, that will be one of the things that we'll include in our discussion when we talk to council. David?
David Goodman, Elandon Drive. Ditto to the thanks to all the commission members for this very hard work you've done. I have a concern about the ranked choice voting proposal. I understand the benefits it can create, but when you combine that with a lowering of the signature threshold, so you potentially have more candidates on a field, and we're then asking voters to make more sophisticated decisions about a larger field of candidates, and it all comes down to one election. I'm concerned that not to underestimate the intelligence and sophistication of our voters, but in my experience, people's attention gets focused after the primary. They may learn more or less about them up to that point, but that's when they really focus in. And if you eliminate the primary and base the entire election on one vote, when it just may be a little overwhelming to learn about a multitude of candidates, we may get the unintended consequence of just having better known or better funded candidates kind of blow out the field early on. Thank you, timekeeper.
Thank you. Anybody have a comment about that?
Yeah, I do. People can vote for as many or as few candidates as they want. So typically, if you think of judges, for instance, a lot of voters don't vote for judges because they don't know them. And so it's a function of where the voters really are. If they only know 2 candidates or 3 candidates, they can put those 3 candidates in rank order. It's very easy to do. You just say, this is my favorite, this is my second choice, this is my third choice. If there are 15 people running, there will be a small number of voters who, if it's possible, it probably wouldn't be possible to vote for 15, but there would be a small number of voters who vote, who rank as many as possible. But, you could still, it's currently done. Some people bullet vote. It really eliminates the need for bullet voting because it never hurts your real top choice to vote for a second and third choice. But if you could vote for 1, 2, 3, or 4, 5, 6, whatever, there's going to be a limit on the ballot.
I understand. My concern was just how much will the voters know about a large field? And there is a salutary effect to limiting the field to the 2 highest or 3 highest. But to have a multitude and then have one chance to vote, whether you vote for 1 candidate or 10, I think can make for a less informed result.
I think the limit is probably going to be 6, but I'm not sure. I think ballot, there's an actual limit on the ballot, but I can't say for sure. So.
Okay. Well, thanks.
Well, and And what you bring up is one of the fun parts, is you start pulling one piece of string. And so it's, if we did it all today, that could be a really problem if everything got passed. But, oh, we do this part and then we do this part. And so it was this constant what-ifing scenarios. And so it's like, where do you even go and be? And if ranked choice gets approved, but the threshold doesn't limit, then okay, not an issue. So just that constant, and it was, let's get as much to council as possible as well as to the public, so that we can have the discussion. Because if people don't bring that up and we pass things, and then it becomes a problem, that's a big problem. So it's reflective of what we were hoping is as much conversation as possible too, because we just don't know what we don't know.
Also, I understand your concerns. Getting on the ballot is one thing, getting elected is something else. It still costs quite a bit of money to run a successful campaign here. So there are sifting mechanisms. Whether you believe in that as being democratic or not, it's still really happening, that people have to invest. If you're not going to invest money, you're going to have to invest a lot of lifetime going door to door and that sort of thing. So there will be built-in challenges, even if you get 50 signatures, bang, you're on the ballot kind of thing, and I'm one out of a field of 20, there's hope for me kind of thing. It's still, there really is going to be a lot of interaction with the public in order to get the recognition, that sort of stuff. So I think there are some regulations built in outside of the ranked choice voting system, just in as far as reaching the public, being credible, all that sort of stuff. So we'll see what happens, but I do understand the concerns. I think, though, that the community is intelligent enough to figure this out.
Anyone else? Yes?
Can I make a quick comment? It's also the case that significant and organized minorities can get a candidate elected with ranked choice. People who would not otherwise get their candidate elected because of the way the transfer works. So, and it also would require less money to run a campaign. You could get somebody who's well-known in the community getting a lot of votes without spending, $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 because they're well known already. They're a community leader, they're this or they're that. Or if it's a significant it's somebody who presents themselves as, representative of a significant and organized way.
Chris Rome, 3268 Clarendon Road. Did you say that, or did somebody say that the Board of Elections might have trouble with ranked choice voting?
No, I don't think anybody said that. I mean, the Board of Elections obviously would have to get some new software in order to implement this. They don't have the systems in place right now, but they would need to do that.
I said that they would have the burden of implementing, as opposed to like a hybrid council structure. The city would have to draw that sort of thing. But the County Board of Elections is going to have to get the software and figure out how to print a ballot, that kind of thing. It's been done. It's been done a lot, so it's not new. They're not going to have to reinvent the wheel. But they're the ones who are going to have to create the infrastructure behind ranked choice voting.
May I ask, has anybody in the county jumped on that ranked system yet?
No. We understand that Lakewood may be considering it. But there definitely would have to be some new software obtained by the County Board of Elections. I mean, obviously, we don't have the authority to just do this on our own. We don't run our own elections. They're run by the county, so, yeah. Yes?
Len Friedson again. I want to applaud you for giving voice to ranked choice voting, but I also want to challenge you. And that is, when it comes time to talk with the council about this, I'm guessing they're going to have a lot of questions. And the fact that you guys have worked on this for months, actually, and have become pretty educated in it, it is my opinion, I could probably manage the ranked choice voting and understand it amongst the various flavors that exist, and there are lots of different flavors. It's not just a single thing. But when it comes time to talking with council, I'm guessing they're going to have plenty of questions too. And by inference, the public is going to have a lot of questions too. So I would not wish to minimize the effect on the public. And I appreciate your optimism about educating our public, but it's going to be a big lift, my opinion.
Yeah, just a quick response to that. We have, there is a group called Rank the Vote Ohio, which some folks I think are and so there are mechanisms to do that education. I think if we were going to be presenting specifically about ranked choice voting rather than all of our findings, that we could do, some more visual aids and that it would become more clear with presentation of that kind.
Hi, Sonia Charles, Erie View Road. First, I would also like to thank you for all your work. I would also, as one of the ranked choice proponents, like to thank you for letting us come talk to you and hearing our enthusiastic support. And I just want to reiterate a couple things. It does sometimes initially sound very confusing, but the confusing part is going to be for the Board of Elections. For all the people who are voting, you literally get a ballot. Give me first, second, third. Like you could do with a kindergartner and ice cream choices. Do you like chocolate, vanilla, strawberry? So, and as they said before, cities that do it, after they've done it, most of them are super in favor of it. It gets more people involved. And then lastly, I appreciate the idea of more candidates, and maybe that's confusing people. But as some people pointed out, I feel that way every election about judges. And in my experience, it has been much easier to find out information about my local Cleveland Heights people than it is about the judges, because you can usually find interviews, you can usually find a web page. So I don't know, maybe I just have more faith in my local voters, but thank you.
I know how to use a smartphone. I have no idea how it works. That's if you want to kind of stretch it kind of thing. I know I can tap there or swipe there. My gosh, I've got the web page I wanted, or I can find it somewhere kind of thing. So that's part of it. It's like on the voting end, it really is intuitive, and I don't use that term lightly because I don't know what it means, but it really is. But it's sort of like, oh, I can vote for this one, and if they don't get in, I can do, so it's like, because last election I really wanted to vote for 4 people, and I couldn't, I could only vote for 1. So it really works on the receiving end. Again, and it's software, it's not people, basically, because in the course of the evening, the software does all that tabulating, it does all the calculating kind of things. So, and one other thing, we are hopeful that the city council will trust the voters to make this decision. Whether or not the city council feels totally comfortable or absolutely on top of the math involved in ranked choice voting, they will say, maybe we should let the people decide how they want to elect this kind of thing. So that sort of thing. So again, there's a 3-step thing. We send it to the council sends it to the ballot, the voters decide which of those things they want to do. We are really hopeful that the council will put this on the ballot because it's really time for people to start thinking about how elections work. And so whether or not it gets there, it'll be educational for sure.
Yeah, and I think we certainly recognize that if council decides that they want to propose this, there's going to have to be a considerable investment in public education.
My name's Jim Petrus. I live on Lenox Road. Try to avoid having to stand up here. My name's Jim Petrus. I live on Lenox Road. And while this would be new to Cuyahoga County, it's actually used statewide in both Alaska and Maine and in a lot of municipalities, including New York City and Seattle. And so I'm a big believer that while it's different, it's not complicated. As people have said, we're accustomed to making choices every day. Whether it's ice cream or anything else, all that you have to do is 1, 2, 3, and yeah, thank you.
Any other comments? Don't be shy.
We should have an ice cream ranked choice voting.
Maybe the city will want to do that.
Hi, my name is Thalia. I live on Overland. I just want to say thank you guys so much for the work and detail that you put into the ranked choice voting issue. I do want to say in regards of education that there are several groups that are ready to jump on any opportunity to educate and help both the commission and the council with anything that they need to get ranked choice voting implemented in Cleveland Heights. So this is really important to us. We really think it's a worthy cause and we'll help in any way we can. So.
No, we appreciate that. I think council can take note of that. The commission is almost finished with its work, and while this has been fun, we didn't sign on for a 2-year project. Who else has a comment? No, you're all done? Yes? Hello.
Thank you, Khalil Sarin. I am the mayor of Cleveland Heights, and so that gives me a particular perspective, and I've spoken with the commission before. I encourage everybody to watch their meetings. They had some interesting interviews, and there were a few things that I hoped you might consider, and that I hope that people might consider. One of them is that, in 2019, we passed, I guess you would say overwhelmingly, about 64% of the vote to create a directly elected executive mayor position. And it has appeared to me that in the intervening time since we've been working through the kinks of this particular new form of government, a lot of the focus has been on checking the new mayor. Obviously, I've got a particular perspective. And I think I wanted to make sure that you took a bit of a look at checking the council as well. The council has immense powers as the charter is currently written. The council could, if it wanted to, with 5 votes, bankrupt the city. The council, could make things very difficult for us. And I've noted a few things that I've got some concerns about that I wanted to bring to your attention. I don't know, and if you have, please correct me, but I don't know if you spoke with Judge Costello about the removal process.
We did not talk to him about that.
I'll get there in a second. So I think that there's a concern about how council can, not this council, but a potential council can misbehave, whether it's, holding meetings outside of the public eye, and making decisions, with this has happened before in Cleveland Heights, and something that we hope doesn't happen again. I think another issue that I brought up to the commission in our conversation.
He's bringing several points.
I've got a bunch of different things. I don't expect to go very long, but I suppose I could
Go
stop
ahead.
if you want to hold me strictly to it.
Go ahead.
Okay. So one of the things that I brought up, and this was related to the formation, dissolution, and the structure of departments. I thought that it was an opportunity for a more collaborative approach, that any ordinance that would be provided would be initiated by the administration, who would have much more innate and intimate knowledge of the needs of the administration to perform the work. I don't believe that the mayor should be able to dictate those things by themselves, which is the case right now. But I think that there needs to be a collaborative approach, because I'd like for this charter to avoid some of the politics that can interfere in the efficient and effective administration of the government. And
Right, I think you included that in your comments when you talked to us.
I did, and I think the other thing that I wanted to make sure I mentioned, when you created this in this draft, the section that provides for council interactions with city administration, I'm wondering if maybe you can figure out a way to allow for a requirement that information is received the other way as well, that the administration can ask for and receive reports from the council, because I think that that's something that can help the administration of our government and receive information from the council.
Has that not been happening?
Yes, that has not been happening, but that's not the point. It's something that is not required, whereas this would require sort of a one-way flow of information as opposed to a two-way flow of information. But the other thing that I wanted to point out, I know when I suggested that subpoena power be granted to the council, I thought that it would be very important for that to be a limit of a supermajority of council, because as we see at the federal level, the subpoena power can be abused very easily, especially when politics gets involved. And we'd like to avoid that in Cleveland Heights, I'm sure. Having a higher threshold for that kind of nuclear option, I think, should be important. And so it would be reserved for really those things where a subpoena is needed, not where it's simply desired. But most importantly, in this council interactions with city administration, it is arguably illegal for somebody to stand before council, even without an oath being administered, and lie to council. And this particular situation that has been drafted would allow for either the council president or any single member of council that happens to be a committee chair to effectively subpoena the employees that are requested to come to a meeting and answer questions. And so I think that maybe that should be something that you consider as well. If you're providing for subpoena power, allow it to be the council that subpoenas as opposed to any individual.
When
member
you
of
go
council.
to a committee meeting now, or your people go to a committee meeting now, you're feeling that that's an exercise of something akin to a subpoena power?
No. I think at this point, and as I shared with you, and I think it's on the website, the spreadsheet of all of the meetings that my directors and other staff have attended over the last year or more. A multitude of meetings that we are, spending with council and council committees. And no, I don't believe that that equates to subpoena power, but I do believe that we have a responsibility to tell the truth when we are speaking before council.
Sure.
And I believe that there is arguably, and as there was an example at the county level of someone lying to council and being prosecuted for it. They were not administered an oath, but they were prosecuted for sort of preventing council from getting information in that way. So I think this is something that when you are requiring at the insistence of one council member, the appearance and without very much discretion or flexibility for that director's schedule.
I will, first of all, I want to make one comment about the scheduling issue.
Of course.
Because, again, we're assuming that people are going to act in good faith and be reasonable human beings. So if a council member wants to schedule a meeting and ask a director to come and says, we're having a meeting on Tuesday, and the director says, oh, I'm sorry, Tuesday's not really good for me, can we make it Wednesday? I don't think there's really going to be a lot of dispute about stuff like that. I'm going to assume that people are going to be reasonable. If somebody has a day off that day because their spouse is in the hospital, they'll reschedule to another day.
We hope for reasonableness, yes,
Yeah, we
absolutely.
do.
And I agree with you. I would hope that, and I'm not making any particular accusation against any particular council member that is on council now, but I do know that if we're trying to future-proof to any degree, then we do have to provide some flexibility because right now there is none. But I would like to say, it says specific meeting. They shall attend, and if they don't, they would be in violation of this charter. And I have some concerns about that. I think that it's flawed in certain ways and could be fixed a bit to allow for the kind of flexibility that you need in the administration of a government. Discretion is important because priorities exist and resources are scarce. And in that way, the time resource of a director is something that is extremely scarce. And there is a difference between requesting that a director come to explain an initiative that they are requesting council's agreement with versus, say, just coming to a committee meeting, say, to be lambasted or something like that, which can and does happen in a variety of jurisdictions. So I would just hope that this commission would be sensitive as well to the needs of the administration and give us the benefit of the doubt that we are operating in good faith as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Anything else? Going once, going twice. Okay, so again, if something comes to you tomorrow or the next day, you can always send us an email. You can come to our meeting next week. Let us know if you have further comments. We will be finalizing our recommendations and sending them to council not later than May 31st, which is our deadline, because we committed that we were going to meet our deadline. So thank you all. Thank you to the commission members.